The following is my conversation with Joshua Riddle. Joshua is the marketing manager for Hayes Bicycle. We've had Joshua on the show before, and I really enjoyed my last conversation with him. I thought I'd have him on again, and in the conversation, we talk about the state of marketing in 2024. We talk about different topics, including channel strategy, social media, website management, campaigns, and just kind of the evolution of cycling marketing over the past few years. This was a fun conversation. I think you can get a lot of value from it. This is the Business of Cycling podcast. Joshua, great to see you again, man.
Good to see you.
Where does this podcast find you?
Finds me in the Achilles tendon of the boot of Italy, taking a freecation with the in-laws.
Puglia.
Molise, which is the forgotten region in Italy.
Molise. They say, there's a saying, I've got a friend from Molise, he says there's a joke where it's like you say Molisent, right? That it just doesn't exist. Molisent.
They say Molise esiste.
That's right. Yeah, it's tiny.
But I guess with the advent of remote working, it allows me to be here, and the little one can enjoy the beach, and I can get work done at the same time.
Totally. Yeah, I'm in the US now. I'm in my hometown of Omaha, Nebraska. My daughter just started high school here in Omaha for her senior year, so that's been
Experiencing some culture shock.
She seems to be yeah, she seems to be doing okay. You know, the Omaha is a little conservative, so nothing too crazy for her to deal with. And she grew up with me, and I've always kind of we've visited, so it's been a nice transition so far. Keep my fingers crossed.
Yeah, wasn't really jumping in the deep end, learning to swim. She's already been there times.
Totally.
Okay.
So like we talked about, this will be fun. It's going to kind of be a fun conversation today. We decided we want to kind of do, I had been hoping to do this for a while, was to do sort of a kind of a marketing focused, kind of a state of play, state of marketing in 2024. So what we'll do is we'll kind of go through some topics, give us your take on it, and I'll bring in some of my points of view as well, and we'll be able to kind of go through it. So just to kind of recap, you want to give yourself an introduction real quick? I know you were on the show already, but maybe let people know who you are, what you do.
Yeah, Joshua Riddle from North Carolina, American by birth and proud passport holder still, but I live here in Italy, and been in the industry for probably the better part of 15, maybe more than 15 years now. Worked at Trek, Pinarello, Campagnolo for a long stint, Basso, Lee Coogan, and now with Hayes Bicycle Group. So selling componentry, the finest componentry you can put on two wheels insofar as suspension, brakes, and wheels are concerned. So it's a fun new project. Interesting times to be in the industry for sure.
Well, to get started, Joshua, I went to Eurobike. It's August, end of August 2024 right now, and I'm seeing lots of positive feedback from the market. As long as you're not a complete bike manufacturer, are you seeing something similar in your point of view?
In terms of positive evolution of the market?
Positive signs of growth, of revenue. Things are kind of coming back to more, I guess, we're kind of getting out of that post-COVID hangover. It feels like brands are getting back to seeing some positive growth after a few years of pain.
I'm not sure if growth is the word I would put to it, but I would say there's some signs of maybe light at the end of the tunnel, if you will. I think it's been pretty dark and bleak, but I think it only paints half of the picture, just because the demand, people aren't cycling less because of the troubles with the cycling market. And there's been some sell through, just people are still buying bikes, and it's a buyer's market now for sure, because everything's on discount, right? However, I think the fact that people are buying and everything is on discount, you're not seeing the reorders. So despite the fact that consumers are purchasing, that feedback of stuff going off the shelves isn't making its way back to the wholesalers in the form of reorders, just because everybody wants to keep their powder dry, I'm sure, until they have, it's a little bit less of a gamble to take on new stock, I think.
Sure. Okay. Yeah, and like I said, I think what I've noticed, at least who still has having a lot of challenges are the bike brands, just because they had really had the most complex kind of warehouse assortments because of maybe the way that during COVID that product would come in kind of staggered, whether it would be, we would get maybe too many of these and too little of these. And so it made it really difficult. But for brands like I spoke with Ceramic Speed and some other component brands, especially premium component brands, and they seem to be, a little bit more positive. So, but I think that's just, part of I think that's just going to be part of the challenges that we're going to see. But so turning our focus here to the topics. So I think some of the topics I was going to talk about today were kind of high level marketing topics, just to kind of get your take on, what you're seeing happening, kind of give people the state of play of today of 2024. So what I'm going to dive into is kind of like e-com, what's going on there, social media, events, kind of how you guys leverage events, how events are being leveraged in 2024, influencers, maybe a little bit, trade shows, and then maybe website. That's a lot of stuff. I know we may get through all of it. We may not. I doubt we will. But I guess one topic that I find really kind of close to my heart, because it's what I do kind of on my other businesses, is e-com consulting, and that's kind of my deepest area of knowledge. So with regards to e-commerce, I guess maybe we can start there. I know that e-commerce has kind of seen a revolution in recent years, especially like if you think about 10 years ago, most brands didn't even have e-commerce, right? And with COVID, when things closed down, people were sort of, thrust into the e-commerce business, whether they liked it or not, because that was, for a period of time, that was the only way brands could really have revenue. So I guess from your point of view, Joshua, from your take, what are you seeing in e-commerce today in the cycling business in August of 2024?
Well, I'd say omni-channel commerce is omnipresent. I mean, you're either doing that or you're kind of going to find yourself swiftly relegated out of the game. It's been an accelerant, the COVID thing, as you rightly put. The fact that people were thrust into almost being obligated to take that step to go to digital commerce. But then that was obligations. You didn't have too many choices to, we're going to stick it out with the brick and mortar stores and so on and so forth. But so they're thrust into doing e-commerce. But then after that, when regular physical commerce, traditional commerce started reopening back up, many of those brands that were taking their first foray into e-commerce then found themselves having to deal with, well, how do we balance that with other forms of commerce as well at the same time? Because if there's not a strategy behind it, it's not that they're compatible just upon face value. And so the omni-channel being omnipresent, it's not merely presiding over all channels. It's about having a strategy of how do you preside over these channels. And I think we're starting to see almost phase 2.0 of omni-channel, omnicanalidad, as they say here. I think it's not just about having geographical coverage everywhere. It's about having a strategy of how do you blend these, different types of commerce with each one of them to create the minimum amount of conflict, but the best amount of positive user experience for end consumers, but also respecting the players in the different channels. And I think you'll see moving forward a blend between traditional and e-commerce. I think this is probably the time is probably coming before it would have naturally occurred if it weren't for the accelerant of COVID, is the advent of click and collect. I think you'll see a lot of brick and mortar retailers start to adopt that whole process of how does a big brand, a global brand, preside over its own e-commerce channels and render that brick and mortar shop part of that experience as well. Because what else we're seeing now, as we touched on really lightly earlier, is with that glut in stock, a lot of people are sticker shocked, a bit gun shy about taking on new stock. And it might just be the fortuitous great timing of trying to push that click and collect issue, because that would mean you'd only have to have just a certain amount of stock for showroom floor display, but then you wouldn't have to have the whole warehouse full, and then you become part of the whole business process from HQ.
Well, what I had noticed, and I had this conversation with some managers over at Eurobike, was we actually had a conversation around channel strategy. And what came about regarding e-com, which I thought was really interesting, was people expect it now. They expect the option. And it's not that you're necessarily going to sell much more online. It's just people want that option. And if they don't see that option, it can create friction, because people will sit down. Like, I think what these managers told me was, and what they saw it as, it's the beginning of the process. It's the beginning of the buying journey, where you get online, you look, you see the price, you see that add to cart there, not necessarily going to do it. You're not necessarily going to buy it, but it's like it's there. You think about it, and it just kind of, it facilitates the beginning of that buying process. And so that's
Does it in a way almost legitimize also the advent of a bona fide company nowadays? So if you don't have the e-commerce option, then you could be
oh,
interpreted as kind
sure.
of a finite brand at the brick and mortar stores. Like, what kind of Mickey Mouse operation is this? Like, I'll go to store X, Y, or Z. Well, I'd like to go because it's a pondered. It's not an impulsive acquisition. You're not throwing down 10K just while you're out buying a loaf of bread for the family, and coming back with an S Works road bike. So somebody's gone to the shop, they've looked at it, they've gone back, or even in the car on their smartphone, had a look. And when they've gone to that e-commerce, if it's just a website and there's not an option to buy somehow, maybe that unconscious or in the subconscious raises a bit of a red flag.
I agree. And I'm I'm guilty of going on in Europe it's Auto Scout, and then in
Mhm.
America it's Auto Trader, where I'll go and I'll look at cars. Probably never gonna buy one, but I'll look at them and I'll see the price, and I want to feel like that that I'm close to that process. And so I think that's part of it. I think another part of it, like we talked about, was just letting people see themselves with that product, right? And it's sort of a psychological, not a trick, but it's more just a way to kind of facilitate and lubricate that process towards the purchase.
I
And
think you
if
mentioned price. That's also interesting because it gives people a bit of a reference point. And then, what more authoritative website to visit than the constructor or the brand itself, right? And so then, yeah, it's a bit of, I wouldn't call it a safety blanket, but it's a bit of reassurance, I guess I should say, that you go there and you say, okay, this is supposed to cost $1,000 for this fork. So when I've gone to my dealer X, Y, or Z, I know I'm within spitting distance. And so that's a place for the negotiation to begin.
Yeah, I mean we're gonna make the dealers mad. Like we're probably sounding like, crotchety old guys now, but like that was always the argument. It was like we can't compete with our dealers, and I don't think we're competing with the dealers anymore. We're not competing. I'm not gonna. It's not that that's not an opinion anymore. I think that's a fact that it's just part of, like you said, the omni-channel strategy that brands are providing. And one other kind of note that I've seen is that has to be the purest expression of your product, of your brand in the world, is on your product page.
Mhm, for sure. Well, I think it signifies also that you're in the same boat, rowing in the same direction. You shouldn't see yourselves as a separate group from your dealers. Um,
And
it
it should be a smooth transition to the dealer for those who, want to do that, where it comes, from the product page right to the dealer.
mhm, I agree.
Yeah, so I think in terms of e-com, I think that the omni-channel is sort of the discussion, whether it be a bike, whether it be a component. So I think that's sort of where we're at in terms of, where I guess maybe to kind of dovetail into a second topic would be perhaps social media. So social media is a really complex topic. I also have got a lot of experience in social media. When it came out, it was sort of a something that, you just got your cousin who spoke English. Like if we're talking about entrepreneurs, initially back in 13, 14, 15, it was just like, we'll just get someone to kind of, copy paste some product page information, put some photos up, just to get it out there. We'll let the young people, give the young people some content as well. And then that has really transitioned into, people are on their phones all day long when they're not working, when they're not, at their desk. And so this is a channel, social media, whether we like it or not, where you engage with your customers. I think you find your new customers, you engage with them, you are able to express yourself as a brand. And it's a confusing, I see it's a confusing channel for brands because, you've got Facebook, you've got that's going in its direction. It's sort of, it has been stagnant in terms of user growth. Instagram, which is still very strong. TikTok, which came out of nowhere and is like a total juggernaut. And then you've got, LinkedIn, people get on LinkedIn as well. And not to mention that you've got Twitter. And so it's a huge topic. And what I see personally is brands are a little bit freaked out by it, by the, how to manage it, because
Well, it's not an afterthought anymore, for sure, as it was
absolutely
in the
not.
beginning. We'll just leave it off to the intern or the young whippersnappers, if you will, that kind of get it. They're into, but now it's not even skewed towards age. There's a different social media for every age group. There's different audiences that kind of tack to a certain social media as opposed to another. And so it's gone from being something that you could almost improvise and was organic to something that requires, I won't say the lion's share, but a big slice of your marketing budget and plan. And
A
what
lot
with
of
the fleeting,
energy, a lot of energy and focus.
well, what with the fleeting nature, to your point, there's so many different channels, but even within each channel, it has its own sub channels. Like, you got your regular posts,
Reels. Yep.
your reels, your stories, and so on and so forth. So to be able to preside on top of that, and then looking at you add into the element, the fleeting nature of content, basically a marketing program, whereas before you could count on having 2 or 3 shoots a year,
Yeah,
and count on having
exactly.
a from a couple of sponsored teams. Now you have to become almost a de facto
Content,
production
content
to be able to
production.
preside over. Yeah, because that's 365-day editorial calendar, and not just day by day. It could be multiple posts per day. So to be able to fill that up requires a fantastic amount of content. And if content doesn't punch through the noise, then you've spent some money to create content that's not going to do you too many favors. So not only is it pay to play, it's not organic like it was in the beginning. So you've got to keep to the side of a good bit of budget to boost
Well,
good
let's
content.
let's
You
talk
have to
about
create good content.
let's
Yeah,
dive into
good.
that, Joshua, because I think we might be skimming over some things here as well. So in terms of like organic content and paid content, we can maybe let's break those down and
Easy.
give people a better idea. So organic content is just the content that you create and that can organically, naturally, based on the amount of followers that you have, will reach a certain amount of people. And that more in the past, the more organic content you posted, kind of your following would grow. But that has changed.
Well, the amount of good content that you could put up would grow organically. It would also, you were on a level playing field before the whole pay to play scheme came into to being, because it would actually let the Davids have the same positioning as the Goliaths. So even the small startup companies had the exact same bandwidth as your big hegemonic superpowers, if you will. And
If
so it was
if
just
you
have that
were
one
yeah,
great photo shoot and putting together some amazing content, and there you were sparring with the big boys, if you will.
right, and if you were good at making content, and if you had a good strong message, I remember, like, there's some smaller producers, smaller entities, like, even I was thinking back on, like, this is going to date me a little bit, but there was a race called the Red Hook Crit, which was just a fun, interesting. It was a fixed gear criterium in kind of cities that just had great visuals. All the people that were around it were just sensitive to photography. And so you could get like really edgy, fun, creative content. And that sort of, like you said, crashed through everything and got really strong, you know, engagement. And so that was really, it was powerful. That doesn't really happen anymore because everything is sort of leveled off. Is that why?
Well, everything is leveled off, and then even with the algorithm now, it's just that organic post is limited in such a way that you can have the best art direction, you have the best message, you can have a strong tagging game, the right hashtags, and so on and so forth. But it's only going to get to a certain level because the powers that be, the owners of that, can't. They've got to make some revenue, right? So allowing things to blow up and be viral just because it's a great idea, I think doesn't exist anymore. So gone are the days that you just had a fantastic campaign, art direction was on point, and some fantastic copy and amazing photography, and that would let you kind of play ball with the big boys. Now there's got to be some budget associated with that if you want it to be seen by an ever increasing public.
Sure. And so I think that's a big kind of shift that's happened in the last 10 to 15 years is now I mean, you still have to make great content, but the percentage of growth that you can expect from great organic content has diminished.
It
And
can't the one card played on its own. It's got to be a card, and then you've got to raise it with another ace, apparently, called budget.
Right. So there's a part of, so we'll get into the paid. So there's a part of the content that we'll just call, we'll say Instagram, because Instagram is still, I think, by far the most popular platform for the cycling business.
Mhm.
So, part of your teams are gonna of marketing teams are gonna be investing in organic content, which we said was, and there's a shift going on there where it's less photo, more story, more video. And then you've got the paid, which essentially the paid content just allows uh, the platform to push your content out to a targeted audience that you choose. And we don't have to get into the specifics of it, but you're pushing out the content just by putting money into the machine, and then you're able to show it to people.
Well, I think
Um,
the word you put in there is targeted, which is probably the key. Having the paid allows you to target. There's the old saying, which is a bit of a note that I'd put down for advertising, but I guess we are into advertising now, is that the old marketing adage was whatever your marketing budget for ADV is, you're going to waste half of it. The only problem is you don't know which half.
Absolutely.
And and so with paid advertising on social media, where I don't want to paint it as a total negative, is the fact that you do know that you're sending that message to the target audience that you really want, as opposed to, maybe you're boosting some organic posts and you're augmenting the number of people that are see it, but it's not to say that you're getting it into right people's smartphones.
Right. But the idea at the end of the day is, it's funny because like you can call it what you want, but at the end of the day, we're just showing messages to the right people. That's the goal, right? To show a good message to the right people. And so it really hasn't changed from the days of magazine ads, billboard ads, TV ads. It's just the medium has changed, but it's all about creating a strong message and then pushing it out to the right people at the right time. And so that's where the skill kind of comes in of being able to use the platforms in, an effective way, measure it, adjust on the fly. Those are the kind of things that I think it takes to be successful in what I've seen, in the past, as of today.
Well, the napalm approach is impossible now. It's not that you can.
But you can, it's just very expensive.
It would be very expensive, but then you get back into that wasting 50% of your budget adage again. I think now, your dancing partners need to be picked if we're talking about traditional media. But at the same time, when you're doing your spend on social media, it's got to be to a targeted audience. And then I guess if we want to take it even more mile high as a viewpoint, there's been a dynamic shift in the approach towards the end consumer. Gone are the days where you could make a product and then go look for customers. Now you find a customer and a customer group that has a need and you fulfill it. And so the approach to get to those end consumers is 180 degrees different than before, where you could just hammer your message in and then hope that people would adapt to what you've made. Now I think you make it's also, I mean, it goes all the way back to product management, that you're making things for consumers and then finding the message that's going to be right for them. And that goes, right down the path of finding the audience and tailoring that message to them.
Right. Yeah, it's complicated to say the least, just because what I've noticed is, all these channels, like, man, like, I had an interview with Simon Summerscales from Canyon. That guy has 100 or 50 people working for him just in marketing. And it's like, how can a family-owned brand that has, 15, 20 employees, they're going to have to make some really hard decisions of where they go, what they do. And it's not easy, obviously, but it's a cost of doing business. Where geographically do you target? What sort of messages do you target? What languages do you target? Especially in cycling, which is such a global and fragmented business. And in my experience working with smaller entrepreneurs, you really have to focus. With the paid, you have to focus on a market that you feel like is strategic to you, and then the rest is just going to be, you know, it's going to be more organic, because we don't have money to be spending, $20,000 in the US, $10,000 in Japan, $5,000 in every European country. I mean, in the perfect world, yes, that would be great, but it's impossible. So at least
I
in
think it's
my
probably easy to make the case that for the smaller startup or the mom and pop operation, or the smaller scale, it's impossible to compete with your canyons or your treks or your specials.
no,
And in a certain sense, it
obviously, but
is.
it's the
I think
same channels. It's the same
right.
channels.
But what I was getting to is that in 2024, the smaller operations also have the possibility to be more surgical, instead of, if we look, you go 15, 20 years in the past, if you wanted to compete in North America, you were going to have to take out a page of advertising in Bicycling Magazine, which didn't come, extremely cheap. And for the small 15 or 20 employee custom made bike manufacturer, how many of those could you afford a year? Whereas your bigger competitors, plenty. Unless, if you're a smaller operation, then you could say, well, we want to, laser precision target this small area. You could dedicate, the budget you had at your disposition to that small segment, to that specific populace, and so on and so forth. So,
And so I think, yeah, that was, I mean, I think that's a good kind of, maybe we can put a pin in that one, because I think, we could go deep on, what I'm seeing in terms of like, there's a channel strategy topic where me personally, I think TikTok is really strong. I think it's a good way to grow, but I don't think brands have the ability to create the type of content that's necessary on TikTok, which is short, fun, candid, a lot of video. And I think that's, and not only, so only some of the biggest brands have been able to have a decent presence on TikTok. And that's just because it is a really complex channel, which I think is kind of a microcosm of the situation of social media, where it's like, there's so much and you can only do so much.
well, I think most of them feel that they can't dedicate attention and budget to TikTok because it means that they'll have to give up attention to some of these others. And now there's so many other important ones. Can we not dedicate budget to Instagram? More than likely you'd say no. But if we're getting back onto the organic versus paid, and you can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but my understanding is that TikTok is probably the one that offers the most amount of organic upside out of all of
100%,
them.
100%.
Because it's new and it has to grow, but your effort gets repaid more because there's more organic possibilities at your disposition then.
Right. And then you have to deal with, the demographics of TikTok, which are skewing more towards older every day because it's growing so fast. But it's, no one ever got fired for investing in Instagram, right?
No.
So we'll just leave it at that. So in terms of another topic, I guess that sort of around social media is, I think influencers is a really interesting one, which I'm noticing is a way to definitely turbocharge the visibility of your brand. And again, it's a channel, it's a choice that brands have to make. You're sort of betting on that these influencers do have a sort of aligned audiences you have, so you have to make some guesses there. It goes back again to it's a jump kind of into the dark, salto nel buio that we say in Italian.
Well, you speak Italian, so you'd appreciate this one, is that a ogni scarafaggia bella mamma sua, no?
No, what does that
To,
mean? I've never heard that one.
to every cockroach, or every cockroach is beautiful to its own mother.
Okay, sure.
I'll let that one loose in a meeting or two.
You can put lipstick on a pig, maybe?
No, it's
No.
basically that if my brand, let's just say Hayes Corporation, we're talking about brakes. If we say that it's the best brake since brakes have been
Oh,
invented,
sure.
one thing,
Yeah,
but it holds tons more weight if somebody else is speaking about it, right?
absolutely. It's more
That,
PR than, right?
so the relationship with the influencers, and obviously as with anything in influencers, you've got the good, the bad, and the ugly. But the ones that come across as genuine, and I guess that's one of the points that I'd written down to touch on, is that if you can find the right one that feels genuine, independent of what, if it's nano influencer or mega influencer or macro influencer, if it feels genuine, then that's a great extension of your brand because it's got more authority. It's not you talking about your bona fides. I mean, every brand under the sun just talked about how great their product is, obviously, but it holds more weight if someone else can say it. The trick
100%.
is being able to identify the one that has that A gets the game and B can come across as genuine. And I've seen, I think one red flag, obviously the audience of this podcast is going to be people that operate in our sector and are looking to communicate. It would be careful with some of the mercenary influencers, I would say, because the ones that are, they can change their jacket with every season, then it might come across as even less influential when you're trying to get that authentic, authoritative message out. But if you've got an influencer that's really good at the game, really getting, tons of followers, lots of engagement and so on and so forth, but it looks like, well, who are they riding with this season? When they come across and say, this is the best frame I've ever ridden, it holds a lot less weight after a while. So I think it's some of those influencers might be a bit short-sighted if they're not into longer term relationships with certain brands. And so I think if you're not careful, you could do yourself a disservice by being involved with the wrong one. The upside is if you're involved with the right one, it can be a fantastic investment.
Yeah, no, I agree. And it goes back to, I guess there's like you said, the kind of the validation of an relatively impartial party is more authoritative. I think the way that I always tell people is like there's different levels of recommendations, right? There's if your friend tells you that something is great, you know, that's a really strong recommendation that you're going to definitely listen to and maybe take action on. If the brand tells you that they're great, there's much less trust there, right? Because they're just
Mm.
talking about themselves. But I think in the middle there, like we talked about, are the influencers and is PR, which is another topic, which I think continues to be strong in all the you know people are reading continue to read blogs. It has definitely obviously shifted from printed to online. But can you tell me a little bit about maybe your strategy around PR and how that's evolved over the last, you know, throughout your career?
Yeah, I'll jump into PR. Just one last thing on influencers. I would say that when I just another tip or trick is when I become involved with any influencer or try to connect them with my brand, I was always tried to maintain as most of a laissez-faire attitude towards them as possible, insofar as I didn't. If you think that influencer has value, it's probably because they have the right recipe for, you know, their own personal brand, if you will, and their way of communicating. The more I try to get in the mix and tell them how to do things, the less authentic it's going to come across, as
Totally.
opposed to just some minimal guidelines at the beginning of the year, get the relationship kicked off, and every now and then maybe have a brainstorming session here and there, but always, you know, let the artist be the artist. You know, it's like having an athlete trying to overcoach them. You know, you have to have a minimal amount of talent, or else you shouldn't have them on your team, right?
Agreed. So
So yeah, you said PR, I believe.
yeah, PR, maybe I'll just PR is honestly, I sort of grew in the business sort of digitally native, and PR was sort of for me it was a bit foreign, but it goes back to that discussion around people trust authoritative third party entities, right? So
Mm.
bloggers, magazines, online publications. So I guess yeah, I just was curious to hear your take on PR, how it's evolved, because you've gone pretty deep in PR, I know, in the
Mm.
past, and I was just kind of wanted to know what your take was on the state of play there, because I'm sort of out of my league in in this discussion.
Well, we touched on omni-channel commerce, but I would say that press has gone in the same direction insofar as it's omni-channel. You could say that the printed page is died a slow death or a fast death, depending on how you look at it. But I think print still has a say in certain pockets, and it stays alive only if it's bolstered by digital now. So it's omni-channel. You have printed page, you'll have digital media, as you touched on as well. You'll have, you know, the small independent players, because now, you know, the cost of entry to, you know, be a blogger is very low. So, you know, you don't have to worry about printing tons of numbers and distribution. You can just get it on the internet. And so you've got, even within the digital space, you've got your small players and your larger players. So there's print, there's digital, there's, you know, small blogs, there's, you know, huge media conglomerates advertising on those channels, participating with those. I think it's only if it's quantifiable in a digital manner. So you have the digital publications that are bolstered by print, perhaps, but you've got to be involved with them in some way, shape, or form. Um, yeah, we've already touched on the 50-50 analogy and how the napalm approach isn't possible anymore. But there's such a long list of media outlets in every single market now, some more than others. But you really do have to pick your dancing partners, because unless you're, you know, enormous scale, you mentioned your contact at Canyon having 50 people in his marketing department, but not every marketing department is that deep. And so to preside and maintain contacts with, you know, I've gotten my Rolodex probably 900 media contacts. And that's more than a full-time job to stay in touch with everything and maintain those relationships as they need to be maintained, keep them all informed, but also have a cordial connection with them. So uh, you know, information needs to flow out to everyone, but to maintain certain relationships, and especially insofar as advertising is concerned, you've got to pick some dancing partners for each market. And I think that's what's changed a little bit. Whereas before, maybe you could, you know, give a little bit here and there and kind of keep everyone happy.
Do you
Especially,
do you use, I wanted to ask you, do you, in your experience, can you talk a little bit about using an agency for PR versus doing the PR internally in the brand and kind of the pros and cons of each?
Yeah, well, I think there's definitely a pro and a long list of pros and cons for working with an agency. Obviously, not everybody has the expertise or the contacts to be able to get in touch with media. I think the trade-off there is, yeah, you get involved with them. You've got an agency that has a foot in the door with pretty much every media contact out there, or they should. However, I think the message can sometimes get diluted. Either you've got an agency that's just really in tune with what you're trying to communicate, or else it's difficult to get the exact message that you want through 3 degrees of separation between yourself and the media outlet. So who better than Q to know the message that you'd like to get out there and how you want it directed, or else that agency kind of has to be a de facto extension of your brand, and that means you're going to need them involved with you at every step of the development of that marketing plan, getting those bullet points constantly. I mean, they have to be in lockstep with you. That's
Sure.
not the easiest thing to accomplish.
Yeah, it's an investment either way.
Oh, for sure. Well, that being said, it's either an agency or you've got to have the staff members that can fulfill that role as well. So uh, it's not cheap, it's not easy, either way you slice it. But yeah, the risk of being detached from every day-to-day operation, and you know how quickly things can evolve inside a company, how the narrative, we'd like to change this slightly, or it's a more complex message that we'd like to get out there. How effectively can that be done for somebody that's not eating, sleeping, living, and breathing in 10-hour a day X?
Totally. So when you're deciding on external contractors versus internal contractors, is that sort of or internal employees versus external contractors? Is that sort of the litmus test where it's like, if it's someone that has a skill that you need and you're not able to kind of grow that internally, that's when you make that choice, or am I reading that
That
correctly?
would be my advice. I mean, you can't not have contact with the media if you. I mean, I guess you could take the approach of just doing social media alone, but I think that we can't negate the usefulness of having industry specific and sector specific publications out there, giving things from a more authoritative approach. I mean, I don't think most of us would make our purchase decisions, at least if you're talking about some big expenses like a complete bike, or stuff over $500 or $1,000, certain thresholds, you'd like to do a little bit of research. And the influencer on TikTok, while it can help with frequency and brand association, I think maybe the authoritative view comes more from somebody that can test something, ride something, and speak intelligently about what's in there. Yeah.
Wow. So you're saying that especially for new brands, that an authoritative, yeah, and I've noticed that too. It's like you do like for that type of a process, purchase, people just mentally they want a third party to vouch for it. They have to.
Well, yeah, I see somebody that's put it through their paces and has put many different products of the same segment through its paces, and for lack of a better association, maybe your consumer reports, if you will, just to feel safe. I mean, before you plump down $1,000 on a product or more, you'd like to have. At the end of the day, it is an investment in our enjoyment or time in the saddle, and you want to make the best choice possible before making that happen, right?
But I guess
I think that if I
my
buy my
my
life, I do that due diligence.
totally. And my question was maybe a little bit wider in a sense that because you had talked about needing to have a real connection to the brand in terms of, marketing. You were talking about PR, but I'm thinking more in a more broad sense, like how are you using contractors and how do you kind of differentiate, or what is your kind of decision criteria on using contractors versus hiring in the terms of marketing?
I don't know if you could write a black and white rule, or have a rule of thumb exactly,
No, of
when it's
course.
when it's not. But I think just in general, if you find the right contractor that you feel you can be able to work in lockstep. I mean, some agencies, some contractors are able to really get between quotation marks from the get go. And if you find that you guys are on the same wavelength, and little by little you can give more and more accord to them, then I think then that's probably a good choice. What's important is kind of what's going to be seen by the end consumer on the outside. It shouldn't be noticeable that your communication efforts have been done through an agency or through someone in-house. And as long as you can ensure you feel relatively at ease that you're getting good, genuine, coherent messaging that coincides with kind of what your mission and core values and core statements might be, and they're getting out there and told in an efficient manner, then if you can say that, then I think by all means, an agency is fine to work with. The flip side of that is you could also have internal colleagues that might not be able to hit the nail on the head with every com. So it's a delicate dance. I don't know if one is preferable over another. It's easier for somebody to be within the four walls of the company, and you'd hope that through osmosis they just really get the brand values and understand how to communicate what you like. But there's probably not a golden rule as to which of the two is preferable.
Yeah, but it sounds like having someone in-house is pretty, having someone in-house is pretty important in terms of like being able to express the brand. And that from I guess from a marketing standpoint is a big hurdle for an external supplier, correct?
I would say if you have the budget that would permit it, having somebody to manage one individual to manage your agency outside, that way you've got the dedicated resource to be able to ensure constant contact with your external agency and ensure that they're not having to just wing it. I think that would be probably the best bet if you don't have the budget and the resources to have enough internal people to manage press.
Right. And I'm not, like I said, I'm not talking about just press, but all aspects, because like you've got Google Ads, which is a topic, SEO is a topic, paid ads is a topic, website is a topic. And I know that often in this business, that is, those are topics that you can't hire. And so I see it, as a kind of a supplier of these services, I see that there's always that like, okay, how much can we do internally? Which internal for a lot of these brands is, it's just better. You've got them right there. You just can, hey, come over here. Let's look at this thing here. It's so much more convenient for brands. But with such a wide array of topics, at least in my experience, I've seen that it's really difficult to do them all internally. And then once you do kind of go externally, that's an investment in itself, because obviously you have to pay the person, but then you have to keep up with them and make sure that they're aligned.
Well, you have to keep up with your internal employees as well. I would say, and this not, I hope this doesn't come across as a paid advertisement for Wyatt, but it's complex doing the advertising portion of social media, right? The digital adverts. And with the changing nature, because every day it seems like the platforms and the back ends of these different social media companies are changing the way they do advertising, and it's hard. It really have to be dedicated on that, 7 days a week, 52 weeks a year. That's one aspect of it that I think that you're probably almost better off to have someone externally that's just dedicated to living, eating, and breathing that aspect of the communication plan. You know how to work the machine, and then through weekly inputs or twice a week or so on and so forth, and I would imagine that's probably how you run your accounts. You can probably stay in tune and in lockstep with what the directives are of the brand, but be able to work that machine to where someone internally that maybe is wearing several different caps or trying to fulfill different roles might have more difficulty staying in tune with the best practices of digital advertising.
Sure, yeah, and it comes down to, I think, just measuring it and making it measurable, and making, the owner of the process internally, like the marketing manager or the, whoever is is running that from internally, is where they can just look at the numbers and see what's happening. Okay, we tried this didn't work. We tried this did work, so let's do more of that. I think if you can digest it down into that, it makes it easier for everybody. But in terms of like, there are processes. This is interesting. I was that like 3D rendering. Like hardly any brand does that internally, right? Because to be able to do 3D rendering for catalogs or, CAD and things like that, typically that's just something you do externally. And I think there's that mix that, depending on the size of the brand, those sort of things change based on the needs and based on the budget. And
Well, I think
those are
it's the value
strategic
add
decisions. Yep.
right, for sure. I think it's the value add that doesn't necessarily have to be in-house all day, every day to be able to do it effectively. And the fact that you have that skill set, if it's external, with minimum input from the brand, then I think you can take that and run with it effectively.
Sure. And same with like video is another one, video production. Obviously, you're not going to have video, depending on the size of the brand, obviously, but it doesn't make sense. So,
Right.
but it's up to, I guess, for you to optimize your external suppliers. I presume that, do you have any kind of tips on how you interact with your external contractors that you've kind of learned, contractors in these years, that has made it maybe more effective, or for a younger marketing person, kind of if they're feeling like, man, I don't know what they're doing, I don't know what's going on, how you keep these partners aligned?
Well, they say the wind never blows in the right direction for a boat with no destination. And another one of my metaphors, but
Love it.
it's all about how clear of a brief can you write. And I think that comes down to also being a good manager, even internally, is if you can't set the right expectations and condense it down into, and I think it needs to be written, because the process of writing is almost, one step closer to coherency 100%. It's, if you can write a one pager and effectively communicate exactly what you want to get out of project X, Y, or Z, the scope is really nailed. It might not, there might be some revisions, but at least it's a really clear conversation starter from which a lot of questions will come out. And then you'll get an even better, more clear, more precise scope. So the better you can set that off, it's basically the foundation of whatever you want any contractor to do work for. I mean, the word contractor, we probably in North America, we associate that with house building, but it's the same thing. If you don't have the blueprint, then you hand over the keys to the estate, you come back, you might have, a kitchen with no sink.
True. Yeah,
Have some surprises.
as like the older I get, like I'm over 40, and the older I get, it's things are way simpler than I think we let them be sometimes. Like if you think about, just let's just decide on where we're going with this thing. And as long as everybody's agreeing upon where we're going with this thing, then we just measure on, okay, how much closer did we get to the thing that we wanted to achieve? And if we didn't, let's figure out why and how we can kind of turn it around. So it is a lot simpler, but when you're like in their 20s and you're looking at all this stuff, it seems so complicated, but it's actually not quite as complicated as it seems when you're coming up.
I think it's good that, well, in Italy, we talk about the gavetta and you haven't come through the ranks. And there's some
Sure.
value in that, not just so far, just because you've come through the gavetta or come through the ranks, it's because you've been on the other side of that desk and you've been, victim to or subject to maybe unclear directions a time or two. And you've noticed how, oh, well, they asked me to come up with an awesome video for an enduro bike, and that's it. Well, you got a 90% chance of coming back with something that they don't like because they've not filled in the blanks. And so when you find yourself in a position of authority, you're contracting this agency or you're telling your internal staff to get X, Y, or Z done. It's almost like parenting children, not to minimize, your internal staff as children, but if you tell your kids to do something and don't give them clear and precise expectations, then you may be to blame if the output is not 100% correct.
Agree. Totally agree. So we have, in terms of that was like that, I think that was like a really nice going through the PR and being able to kind of see using internal versus external, and then kind of dovetailing that into other topics that we talked about earlier. I guess kind of maybe one last topic that I wanted to hit on, because we're coming up on an hour. I know you've got a little bit of time left. I wanted to talk about events, which events is another one of those topics that can really take a lot of your budget, probably don't have a lot of measurable outputs, but objectively, to be able to go out and press the flesh and talk with people and show your brand, like that is objectively important. And so geographically, to be present, physically present, like there's no doubt that that's important. It doesn't have the nice, fuzzy metrics that we get in the digital world, but regardless, incredibly important for brands. So do you want to just jump into how you approach events?
Well, I think
And
it's timely that we're talking about those now, because I think everybody here towards the end of 2024 is working on 2025 budgets, and every dollar spent, and I think that's from the biggest companies to the smallest, you've got to justify every dollar just what with the given state of the market at the moment. And so there aren't any more sacred cows. So if it's events, it's advertising, it's PR or something, you got to fight for every spend that you're going to make. And I think that's true for everyone. Events might not be immediately quantifiable. They don't have, digital spin has got a leg up on it for that matter. You can show a direct ROI, which has always been the customary challenge of marketing, is to draw a direct line between a spend and a return, right?
totally.
But while you might not be able to judge effectively your ROI on being present at that event, I think one thing you can say is that if you've decided to go to an event, then they have to be executed with a clear plan in mind. It's not just, well, people really like Seattle, so we're going to go to Seattle. So no, what are you going to do at Seattle? What's your plan to punch through the noise at Seattle? What does success at Seattle look like? What can we do differently? What is our main objective there, as opposed to just saying, well, this is the playbook of participating in a cycling industry. You have to be at show X, Y, and Z.
I
So
think
I think,
can I jump in? This is subjectively making people excited
mhm.
is, is a goal that I sometimes I'll see brands like just really simple things like to have a track stand contest,
Mhm.
right?
Okay.
Like that makes people excited. It makes them come, it makes them try. Like if you can just get people to smile at your booth, I feel like that's a really strong one. Not easy.
Mhm.
It's not easy, but that's one that I've seen. Is that something that you also try and to get people to engage?
Oh, I think so, 100%. One other thing that I'd put down, you mentioned we want to talk about trade shows, but I kind of see those kind of being somewhat the same topic, is that for a B2B show, I think there's some value in certain ones of those, but it's not about excitement. Is about having the whole industry under one roof and be able to have that business being taken care of. If you want to be in a B2C event, I think now the format has changed. It's not about, building these immense structures and seeing who can, build the tallest flags or the tallest stand. It's about being outdoor. How can it be more regional? How can it be replicated across many different parts of the market in a geographical region? If we say there's one outdoor show for America, America is a continent,
Right.
and all right. And so there's not one silver bullet to be able to conquer North America for it. Yeah, sea otter, I think, is there's a gray line between when it stops being B2B and starts being B2C. So, that's got a feather in its cap on that front. But I think in terms of events, you have to, and you're seeing the emergence of this all over the place. I mean, we just look at Italy at trade show or shows rather. There's several that have popped up, and the formats that are winning are the ones that you're not having to involve architects in. You're having your stand-up tents, and you'll be able to have that. You have one in southern Italy, one in central Italy, one in northern Italy. In Germany, there's three or four. In Spain, there's three or four. It's being able to get closer to where the consumers are, because some consumers are keen to get in their car and drive 7 hours to a show or catch a plane. But I think that's probably the minority. You want to get close to where people can be influenced, and making them regional, getting closer to the consumer, having it to be a more visceral connection. How can you really connect? Have people there, longer conversations, having to be able to test, to ride, to touch, to feel, and then punch through the noise. How can we do it? What is the USP of the show? What's our unique selling
Right.
proposition
What are
with
you doing
our
differently?
activity there?
Yep.
Right.
I don't I like I don't envy you guys at all in a sense that it sounds like you're making really, really difficult decisions every single day of what not to do, not what you have to. I mean, it's just like there's just so much to do geographically. And so for you to be aligned with with the ownership on this stuff, I imagine that a big part of your job is making sure that it's clear to the company and to the ownership that like this is what we're going to do, but this is what we're not going to do.
Mhm. Well, I think you have to be almost as clear and instinct, or not, what's the right word here? I don't speak English well anymore. Um, you want to be,
Candid.
well, yeah, candid for sure. Intentional is the word I meant. Intentional about your actions, but also intentional about what you're not doing. There's a reason we're not cutting it. Just not just because there's not enough budget to go around, but we do this, we put more weight on this because we can get a better ROI as opposed to this other. And I think that's, like I touched
Opportunity
on.
costs. Opportunity
Well, there
costs.
aren't, and there's no sacred cows. It seems like a lot of people get in, and I think it's a 1.0 mentality of tackling marketing, is that there's a marketing playbook for getting involved in an industry. You've got to get in, you have to have, like in Italy, you have to have a Gran Fondo team. You've got to go to this, you have to go to event X, Y, and Z and set up with three by three tents and Six
No,
Flags.
no, every brand's different. Every brand's
That's it.
different. Yeah.
And I think, if we want to take that and look at the trade shows, I think they've got different utilities depending on the phase of the growth of the company as well. I mean, if you're not looking to nail down new distributors and you're pretty well sorted, then I think the value add for being in an industry show is a little bit lowered. I mean, you could probably spend a lot less and just send your sales guys out to the PMs and other distributors around just to catch up on business for maybe even less money. However, if you're starting up, you're needing to nail down these new clients or new contacts or find new suppliers, being involved with a big stand where people can find you, and you have some of these unplanned drop by visits, probably the juice is worth the squeeze.
Right. Right. Yeah, again, it's complex. I've seen like the mountain bike brand Talk from Italy.
Mm-hmm.
They do a tribe event where owners come. I think they had like 500 owners last year, and they come and they ride together. That's, I mean, the amount of engagement that you're getting, the visibility from an event like that is amazing. I know Santini does like, instead of doing a trade show, they'll do an event in their headquarter. Now they have an amazing headquarter with, space. And so that for them is really, really powerful to bring all these key accounts in and speak directly with them. Not all brands have that sort of those type of facilities and things like that. But in lieu of a trade show, you just need to be engaging. I think at the end of the day, the trade show concept is the B2B trade show concept is how can you engage and excite as many of your customers or potential customers at once.
Well, I think the big value add for being involved in, let's say, like a Eurobike, for example, is that you've got the lion's share of the entire industry under one roof. And even the big brands that don't participate with a stand, they're there with people in the incognito mode. I mean, they're walking around,
Totally.
Trek is specializes there. They don't have a stand, but they're there. And so having that one-stop shop to be able to knock out, 15 to 20 contacts in a day for 3 days, in my opinion, might not be a popular one, but I think we could almost get away with having that be a 5 day long show. Just because every meeting you do at Eurobike, half of it spent looking at your watch. I say to my colleagues that you could almost go through Eurobike without brushing your teeth because nobody looks at you in the face. Just because, you do have that, it's not going to incorporate or necessitate, an 18-hour flight to go and talk with some of your Asian colleagues or counterparts. And so having that one roof to dialogue between and get things moving is an efficient use of your time. Maybe the recipe changes a bit because maybe to do that, you don't need to spend 300K on a stand.
Yeah. Yeah, that's if anything to kind of like tie everything together, it's just it comes down to being really clear about what your objectives are in all these topics, right? Like where do we want to go? And I suppose that can probably start with geographically, where do we want to go? Because at the end of the day, it's about moving boxes
Mhm.
and getting products in stores or on shelves or on online stores. So it's like you kind of have to start there and then work backwards. And then at that point, you have to find, what are the channels that we want to communicate on in which geographies. And then there's the whole B2B aspect as well. But yeah, I think that's a cool way to kind of tie everything together.
Interesting times.
Yes, it is. So what's planned for the fall for you guys? Are you guys will be at any events coming up?
Well, right now we're rounding out the year. We put a lot of focus on sponsoring some, top end athletes. So we've got world championships coming up this weekend for downhill, and that's, treated us very well for the last 2 seasons so far as Hayes breaks are concerned. So fingers crossed that goes well. Events will be involved in a few here in Europe right now. North America doesn't have too many other events between now and the year. So basically it's a few consumer facing trade shows here in Europe over September and October, a couple of events in the race calendar as the season winds down, and then trying to plan for 2025, which has been complex. We'll put it that way, to say the least.
You're working on your budgets. You'll be working on your budgets, I presume, over the next couple months.
Correct. Well, ideally we'd be done with these by mid-October-ish. We're launching a new website, new e-commerce for Europe. So we've got a lot of meat on the grill, as they say,
For which brand? For all the brands?
all brands.
Okay. Well, Joshua,
But
it
I guess
was
it goes to what we talked about in the beginning is that A, for e-commerce, but B, for the website. And I think this is one that I missed out on touching on earlier, is that, and I guess this also goes back to the phase in which a company finds itself in relative to trade shows, but it's also the way you communicate. And while we're looking at developing a new website, this might be of interest. You go around and look at best practices from some of the bigger companies and better companies, and you look at a brand like Nike, who can afford to not even have too much in terms of branding on its landing page. I mean, you go to Nike.com and you see the shoes on sale, but Nike's in a phase in its growth where you don't have to tell people what Nike is. I mean, you can go to the most middle of nowhere corner of the globe and people know exactly what it is. So the brand story doesn't need to be told. Whereas, anything smaller, not as ubiquitous as Ferrari or Nike. Well, Apple does a good job at telling a story. Just really the endless scroll that tells you everything, that makes their product the best since sliced bread. But other ones don't feel compelled to have to do that. Whereas I think you are an extension, you are the salesperson of your own product, and you can't guarantee that someone's going to go in and find a salesman that wants to dedicate the time for you, especially if you're a challenger brand. So for us, we couldn't take the Nike approach, obviously. The whole idea behind the new website was to go really deep in terms of storytelling, optimize UX, make it as deep and profound and informative and interactional as possible on a new website. And I think nowadays it's that digital, can I give you a 360-degree view and be all things for all people, informative, exciting, in language, obviously, I think is another one that gets overlooked sometimes.
Yeah, and so you guys are kind of had to kind of go back to square one and kind of think, okay, how do we want to tell this story and for the different
Correct.
brands, and you kind of noticed that as opposed to the previous website that maybe like what were some of the big gaps that you wanted to fill?
Yeah, it wasn't a clear and coherent brand, like a mission statement. It wasn't immediately clear that we were leaning into what the USPs were. You need to really identify the USPs. It's all fine and well that you feel like everyone in the four walls of your company knows it, but unless it's communicated clearly, you can't be sure that that's resonating with the public outside. So we really wanted to work hard to get back and define these USPs a little bit more clearly and ensure that everything that we're communicating passed through that filter without problem.
And that's funny because you do sort of working in a company, you do kind of get that the echo chamber effect where you start speaking, and I see that a lot when I work with brands where they will assume that people are just as excited about the new colorway that on that one grip that they just came out with, where it's like, guys, 98% of the people aren't going to know, that we're, at least when it comes to ads, these are a lot of people that don't know you very well. So you have to kind of come back from that, hey, guess what, we have the new colorway, and talk about, hey, this is what we're about. And I think that a lot of brands struggle with that because of the echo chamber within the walls of the company.
Oh, for sure. Well, it's even for sophisticated technologies or important USPs that you take for granted that people know because you hear about them all day, every day within your
Yep.
company. But you really have to take a step back and say, well, look, approach this as if you were coming across somebody that's going to meet your brand for the very first time, because oftentimes that's going to be the case. You need to communicate skewed towards that consumer as opposed to the one that follows you all the time. The one that knows you really well is not going to be off-put because you've mentioned that technology again.
This morning from Brian
But
walking in Central City. And
So, man, it was great talking to you today, Joshua. I'm excited to push this out because this was fun. I think this is exactly what I was hoping to do, to give people some kind of insight into the way that you think, and hopefully that will resonate. I think it will resonate with people. So thanks again for coming on.
no worries, I enjoyed it. Always fun to talk shop.
Yeah, man, this was a lot of fun. So thank you, Josh, and have a good rest of your summer.
nothing's gonna.
All right, buddy. You too. We'll see you on this side of the Atlantic at
So
some point
what if
soon.
I
Very
send
soon.
it
Take care.
to